Okay, I have a confession to make. I'm kind of a sucker when it comes to online personality tests. Like, I'm definitely the person who is going to take the bait and click to see which Disney princess I am, which Friends character, any link that comes across my Facebook feed, I'm definitely going there. But there's actually been a few of these tests that have made a huge difference in my life, not so much the Disney princess one. But a year ago, a friend recommended that I take the Enneagram test. And I can honestly say that this particular test has been the most helpful in understanding how I'm wired and also how to leverage my gifts in order to make the impact that I know I'm meant to make. So today's guest is actually a dear friend of mine, and she is an expert Enneagram coach, Tracey O'Malley, and she's used the Enneagram for over several years and helps to accelerate transformation both in individuals and in companies to build powerful, effective and compassionate leaders and create sustainable and lasting change. So if you're sitting there and going, the Ennea what? Then don't worry, we'll explain, we'll break it down exactly what this test is, how it can benefit you, your company, your family, and really your life. Welcome back to the podcast. I have such a treat for everyone today. It's really special when I get to bring people on the show who have had a direct impact on my growth and my journey. And my beautiful friend Tracey is one of those people. So thanks so much for hanging out with me.
I'm excited for this fun chat. We've known each other a long time.
It's been a while. You've known me through a couple of different hair colors. That's always how I quantify how long people... It is so hilarious to show people pictures of me with like the long dark hair and see their faces. And I'm like, oh, wow, yeah, you really have only known me through the last couple of years. So
that's funny because when people say they know me, I'm like, oh, what year? Like, because I know how I was pre-2012. So if it was pre-2012, we've got quite some catching up to do.
Yep, exactly. Well, I got to meet you really in such a cool time of your life and your journey when you were like fully in your light and had gone through a lot of the work, which we're going to talk about. How do you even, what the heck is the work that everyone talks about us having to do? And what's so cool is both of our journeys have really now converged in a whole new way. We met each other in our previous business and now have both stepped into, leveraging that experience to do what we really feel called to do, at least in this phase of our lives. And we reserve the right to change our minds again. But I'm so excited about the work that you're doing now because, unbeknownst to you, the Enneagram, which we're going to talk about today, has had a huge impact on my own growth, especially over the last year, as I've grown as a leader and been willing to step out more and more to share my gifts. So I want you to start with, for everyone who is like, the Ennea what? Like, what the heck is that? How do you spell it? No, but what is the Enneagram? Let's just start there.
It is a personality toolbox is what I like to call it. I mean, there's all different, I'm looking at my desk and I've got 20 Enneagram books lined up and every single one has a different take on it, right? My interpretation of it and how I use it, it's a tool and it is not a weapon or a wall, which is how a lot of us use some of these personality tests that are out there. A lot of the personality tests just focus on behaviors. What I love so much about this, and the funny part is I was kicking and screaming when it came to doing this 8 years ago. But what I love about it is it really gets to the root. And you know me pretty well. Like, I'm a no bullshit kind of girl. I can see through behaviors a mile away. And I want to know where all of the things that have held me back in my life are rooted from. And the Enneagram actually does that when used properly and when used in integrity.
Yeah. And I'll share a little bit more about just my ahas as we get into this. But I would love for you to start with the story of how did your journey lead you to the point of course, finding the Enneagram for yourself, or it finding you, it sounds like, but then you deciding now to use it as this powerful tool to help organizations and leaders and people of all walks of life really understand themselves and how they're wired?
So the long story short, I've got almost 5 decades on this earth, so I've got a lot of history. The short story is I grew up back in Chicago in an alcoholic home. Very early on, from the age of 4, I knew that I needed to be a certain way to survive, right? Whether it was perfectionism, achieving, walls going up, taking charge, whatever. I mean, I have a long laundry list of coping mechanisms that I used to stay safe as a little girl, and they worked, right? The thing is most of us have coping mechanism and belief systems that we have as littles, and we take them into adulthood. And although they worked then, they are the very things that hold us back from joy, from our calling, from growth as a grown-up. So what did I do? I decided that moving as far away from what I grew up in would be the answer. So at 21 years old, moved all the way across from Chicago to Arizona, got married at 21, of course, had back-to-back babies like a good Irish girl does. And, by the age of 25, I was a young wife and mom of 2, and thought, yep, this is how I'm going to solve all of those problems. We're just going to pretend they never happened. And then my daughter turned the age of 4, which was my first memory of like, okay, things aren't right here. And all of a sudden, all those memories I tried to outrun, outwit, outlast, outthink, whatever, came flooding back. And I was filled with so much rage and fear that I didn't know what to do. And I was looking at the eyes of my own daughter, like, if I don't repair this, I'm going to repeat this because I only know that way. Even though I don't want to show her that way, that's all I know. And so now 20 years ago, which is crazy to even say, was my first dive into any kind of personal development. I went to an Al-Anon meeting because my dad was an alcoholic, but it scared me. It was cool to see that I wasn't alone and I wasn't like those people, right? That's how I kept the wall up. 12 years later, which is kind of where we get to this part of the story, I can succeed at anything in my life. That's one of my coping mechanisms, is to just crush goals, because that keeps me under the radar, right? And it was 12 years ago, almost 13 now, that as by then I was a single mom of teenagers in a relationship that was very similar to how my dad was. I was in an industry that I couldn't stand, but really was really good at. I was in the car industry as a powerful woman that is a hot commodity in that industry. And, I had just turned 40 and I was like, God, is this all there is? Is this all there is? And in the summer of 2012, I got a call from my dad saying he was just diagnosed with cancer. They didn't give him much longer to live, and 12 days later, he was gone. And it was like life is too short came and whacked me upside the head. Yet I wanted something different, but I didn't know how to do anything different. I was the sole provider emotionally, spiritually, physically, and financially for my kids. I didn't know anything different, but I wanted something different. And it was ironic because 6 weeks earlier, before my dad passed away, the company that I worked for, they were grooming me to run the entire organization, which is the last thing I wanted.
Gosh.
My ego loved it, but my soul hated it. And he had sent me to some leadership retreat. I was the only employee out of 250 that he sent. And it was the first time I was really honest about, like, I want something different. I'm looking for an exit plan, even though they've sent me here to, really take that business to the next level. I'm actually here to find my exit plan. And 6 weeks later, my dad died. But then it took another 6 weeks after he died for me to spiral out, because my coping mechanisms were all the things, eating disorders, alcohol abuse, codependency, control freakism, perfectionism, workaholism, like all the isms that you could label, like in 6 weeks time, spiraled out and took me to the bottom, which was actually a blessing. Because when you're at ground zero, there's only one way to go. And it's when you're the most humble to say, like, I'm willing to do anything that is so uncomfortable to get me out of this pit. And that's where it landed me. I voluntarily decided I needed help and went into rehab and put all those isms on the table and said, this is everything. I'm leaving nothing hidden, because I know myself well enough to know that I'll keep one of those in my back pocket and pull it out when necessary. So here's all of it. And she's like, shit, like you've covered this table. I'm like, well, I got 40 plus years under my belt. So let's just attack all of it. And it was that moment, my therapist, who I still see today, the same one, she goes, I want you to take this test called the Enneagram. It's like my first few days in rehab, which, when you're approaching the work in air quotes, like, what is it? Like, it seems overwhelming. And then she asked me to take this test on top of it. And of course I was kind of an asshole. I'm like, I don't want to take that test. And she goes, no, like, I'm just saying, but your best thinking has gotten you here. So how about we try something different? I'm like, well, touche, bitch. Okay. All right. And so I took the test for the first time. And when I looked at what it said, it's just like, Lindsay, when we look in the mirror, do we ever look at all the beautiful things first thing when we look in the mirror? Our eyes go to the things that we want to improve or that we don't love. And when I first took the Enneagram, this was no different. I immediately went to all those qualities about the 8, which is what I am, the challenger, which basically says you're the biggest asshole on the entire Enneagram. You can be a bully. You're intimidating. You thrive on making people uncomfortable. And I was like, yep. But thankfully, like in that moment, I was like, okay, that's one area of me, but how about I focus this and took my eyes off the spots that I don't like in that so-called mirror. And I looked at all the beautiful traits of the 8. And I saw things like world changer, impact maker, world-class thought leader, justice seeker. And I was like, yes, those have been in me since I was a girl on the playground getting bullied by Denise Richards. Yes, I went to school with her.
I heard that on another podcast interview, and I had to do one of those. Wait, what did she just say?
Yes. So like my superpower is, as an 8, when they're healthy, that's the key. My superpower is that I can take charge and know how to mobilize others to get things done. I can be a great leader, and I will always champion those that can't fight for themselves. And I have always been that. But life kind of kicked the crap out of me, and those unhealthier things about being a bully and intimidator kind of got in the way. So it was in rehab actually 8 years ago that the Enneagram found me. And it was interesting because when I saw all the things about the Enneagram, I had a 14 and 15-year-old at home while I was in rehab. And when I was reading this, it made sense why the way that I communicated wasn't landing on their heart, both of them, the way that I intended. Because as an 8, we kind of communicate at an intensity level about 100 times more than we think it is. And I've got a 2 and a 7 at home, which made perfect sense. And so it made me aware for the first time about how I show up has an effect on others. And even though I grew up kind of like in my 9 wing, that peacemaker, this was a different kind of awareness. Like, like I need to know who I'm talking to be effective, not necessarily protected, right? Because when we operate from a place of protection, like that's not our true authentic self, right? And so I decided in that moment in rehab, like here moving forward, I don't need to be right. I just want to be effective in the way that I was called by God, by all these things that I had been through, I knew mattered for something. So let's be effective with it instead of just protective. Yeah. And that's kind of where this all started 8 years ago.
Gosh. And in that time, since you and I came into each other's lives, I've really watched you create team and empower people around you like never before. And then once you started talking about how you've used the Enneagram that entire time, and it came into my life last year, so many things came full circle for me. Looking at you, someone I've always admired for your leadership skills, to realize that you've really done what this test can help people do, which is understand everything about you and understand how to harness the best parts and create awareness about when you're in what you so eloquently said, the more unhealthy side of your personality. And that was the most eye-opening part for me when I first took the Enneagram. And I'd never seen, I usually reject these personality tests in general because I'm like, don't tell
Same.
me who I am. I'll be someone different next week. Every time I've taken the DISC assessment, like I've taken it several times over the last 10 years, it's always different. So what makes the Enneagram unique in that sense compared to any other test, personality test someone else has taken?
You know, it's funny that you said that because when my therapist wanted me to take it, I was like, I don't want a label. Like I'm
Yeah,
already in
right.
rehab. Like I've already got that label. I'm that single mom that went to rehab. Like we all know. Like don't put another freaking label on me. And I don't want to be put in a box because I've felt like I've been in a box my entire life. And she said, exactly, this will help you get out of the box you've put yourself in and other people have put you in. And how it's different is, you know, like the DISC, the Myers-Briggs, they're great. They're great because you can kind of change behaviors. You can see what your typical behaviors are. And the Enneagram lets you know behaviors too. But if we don't understand the motive behind our behaviors, even if we go to change, that's why the diet industry is shit. Because yeah, people will change behaviors for a short period of time. But if we don't address the motive behind it, it's just a matter of time and nothing will be sustainable. And if we're changing behaviors that aren't true and authentic to us and who we're designed to be, not only will it not be sustainable, but we end up actually doing a lot more emotional harm than good to ourselves because then we go into the imposter syndrome and the shame cycle. And shame, my friends, is the silent killer. And when I looked at this, when I could look at the unhealthier parts of the eight, the thing about like the guarded and the bullyish and like the bulldozer qualities, when I could see that this was rooted in a motivation that, um, you know, my core motive is to not be put in a vulnerable situation, to be protected, and you know, knowing what I grew up
Mm-hmm.
with and what I've experienced as a little girl, that makes perfect sense, right? And my desire for intensity in areas of my life, that makes sense. And instead of beating myself up for those things, I could have compassion for myself. And it allowed me to, when those things would pop up, because we're all human and certain areas will bring it up more, instead of beating myself up and using this thing as a weapon on myself or a wall, because I used to use it as like, this is just who I am, deal with it,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Instead of a wall like that or a weapon like, oh my God, I'm such a piece of crap, right? It was like, okay, this is just a compass. This is just a compass letting me know, instead of staying on my path and on my road and in my lane, I've hit those bumpy things on the side of the road. And if I'm not careful, I can go over the cliff. And it takes the emotional charge out of those behaviors. And that's what I love about the Enneagram, because it gets to the root. And it gets to you to the root of where you can actually have compassion for that little girl that's still, or little guy that lives inside of you,
Yeah.
that is driving the bus, right? It's like, oh, you little sweetheart, I know you had to do this to be safe. And I've got you sit in my little you're riding shotgun, but I got the wheel here. And when you can approach it like that, instead of just like, God, I suck, which is like the internal dialogue I had most of my life. Once that goes away, like you can actually step into your calling and you can lean into your superpowers, and you kind of stop comparing yourself to people who have different superpowers than you,
Yes.
which is amazing. Because Lindsay and I, although we have similar behaviors in a lot of the things we do, the motive behind it could not be more different. And knowing that, like, I never have to look at Lindsay and compare myself. And actually, I'm here to tell you, powerhouse women out there, it is so much easier to cheer on your sisters when you know you're not competing with them.
Oh,
And
that's so true.
and the Enneagram, like, and I'm not one to throw out, I know that you're going to be surprised by this. I am not one to throw down recognition, um, especially for myself, but even for other people, because I felt like they were competition. And if I at all praised them, that would mean I was weak, which if you
Yeah.
know the Enneagram 8, that makes a lot of sense. But in understanding all of this, I can cheer people on so authentically from my actual place of like love,
Mm,
that this helps doing that, because you realize like, oh, she's got those gifts, I'm never going to be like that. And you can breathe again.
yeah.
Like I don't have to be like that, I can tap into my stuff,
Oh,
right?
okay. You so perfectly captured where I came around to once I opened my mind to taking the test. A friend had suggested I take it. She was really into it. And I thought, oh, what the heck? And first was pissed at the result, I was telling you,
Same.
because, we, like you so beautifully put it, we always look at like the negative qualities of whatever we don't love about ourselves. And I didn't agree with those. I was like, no way am I that way. But once I actually read through and started to understand the power that this view could give me, it gave me freedom around something that I've actually wrestled with my whole life, thinking I had to be less of because it was a huge weakness. And I've actually done a whole podcast episode on it, which is people pleasing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have shared with you the result I got on the test is a 9, which is the peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the unhealthier characteristics when I'm not in a good place with the way that I'm wired, and I'm going to have you actually, because you're so much better than me at even breaking down what this all means. But I remember reading that and also seeing in that moment that the thing I thought I had to lose about myself, that I had to not be a people pleaser at all, that actually was just the other side of something that was actually my biggest strength. So it wasn't that I had to stop caring what others thought. I actually cared deeply, and that's what makes me able to create relationships in the way that I can. But that when I'm in an unhealthy place, that I turn that question of what does this person need right now into an unhealthy one, which is what does this person need from me in order to like me? Two sides of the same thing. And now I just get to be more mindful of which version is driving the bus. So tell me a little bit more about, I'm like so curious to hear your perspective on the 9, because I've got you all to myself. So I'm like, we'll just turn this into
absolutely
into personal coaching for Lindsay and all the other 9s out there.
Well, I have a deep love for the 9 because as a child, as an 8, my wing is either a 7 or a 9. And as a child, if I was looking at me as a kid in my home, I would have pegged me as the peacemaker. And because their desire is to avoid conflict and maintain relational connection, right? Avoid conflict when we're unhealthy could mean we completely fall asleep on ourselves, right? But avoiding conflict and being effective communicator and being very relational is actually your superpower, right? So like you said, it's two sides of this. And obviously as a kid, I was shutting down completely on myself to keep the peace. When you look at the 9 and you see their passion as laziness of spirit, yeah, no wonder you were pissed when you read that. You're like, what the hell? Like, no, like I am the least lazy and I'm full of spirit. I mean, you guys know Lindsay, like she's like the epitome of spirit led, right? But what I love most about the 9, and my personal coach is a 9, and he's a pastor, and he's done amazing things, but a 9 at their best can reconcile irreconcilable points of view. Like they are the voice of reason. And I like to give the contrast. So a 9 when they're unhealthy resemble kind of like Eeyore, from Winnie the Pooh, like whatever you want. I don't care. I'm going to just move along. Mo's like, don't bother with me. I'm just over here. But a 9 at their best is like Yoda. They are like Yoda, and they're king and queen of the Enneagram, because if you know the diagram of the Enneagram, the 9 sits at the top. And they are the one type that can embody all of the other 8 better than any of the other types.
Yeah.
And so when they tap into that part of them, they actually can do things that the rest of the types can't. And it's just a matter of knowing that, and knowing that your opinion, although it may not always keep the peace, it matters. You have a voice that needs to be heard, which a lot of 9s in their unhealthy state, they don't even know what their opinion is because they've shut it down so much. And the thing about the 9 that is probably like, you're not an angry person at all, like you're positive all the time, but the underlying emotion for the 8, 9, and 1 is anger. right? 8s like me, we're explosive with it, right? The 1s, they beat themselves up with their own anger, but the 9s completely just sweep it under the rug, but it's still brewing there. And so when they are pushed a little too far, their anger comes out just in little mini passive aggressive things, right? Until they actually start using their voice. And so I think like I can see this about you, I've seen you step into it the last 2-3 years specifically, like you're in your full health in the 9. And that's why you are able to collaborate and bring so many people. You're so like the 9s are the most inclusive. Like they're never the one like, oh, you're not the Denise Richards on the playground saying, oh, Tracy trash. No, you're like including everybody. And that's a beautiful quality of the 9 as well.
Yeah. So I love how you've really hinted at this in a lot of these conversations, but I'm going to have you answer it directly for those listening who are starting to become curious about this. They're going to go take the test online after this and they want to dig in. So you've talked a lot about just that self-awareness. I would love to hear, because we talk on the show all about getting out of our own way, getting into action. How can a tool like the Enneagram, how can that help us to stay out of our own way? Because that's been a big factor in having this self-awareness for me. And, for me, when we were talking offline, when you said like, what's your intention behind this show? I said, I don't want people just to get motivated. I want them to actually go and do something different because they took the time to listen to this conversation. So what can the Enneagram do in terms of helping us get out of our own way and stay out of our own way?
Well, self-awareness is probably the most underrated, unspoken about superpower there is. In a world of entrepreneurship, it's all about strategy. It's about algorithms and hashtags and all that crap. And honestly, none of that really matters if we don't have a level of self-awareness, because we can do all the strategy, but we may end up, and we may even have success, but then we're unfulfilled. Then we're maybe attracting people we don't want in our lives. And so the thing with self-awareness, and specifically the Enneagram, is you got to have the right information though. And because the Enneagram, and this is kind of what fired me up to actually be out, like, this is what I'm doing, because I'm seeing it used wrong. I'm seeing it used as some cutesy little thing. And I mean, that's fun, but if you took a chainsaw out in the world as a cutesy little thing, you could do a lot of damage with it, right? And the Enneagram, with the wrong information, could do a lot of damage, right? And I don't say that to scare anybody, because information doesn't necessarily equal transformation. And especially if you have the wrong information, it's almost worse than if you have no information.
Yeah.
So you're like, great, Trace, that is helpful. I get it. But because this is more than just a test, right? Because Lindsay and I were talking about her test results, and you get this report back, and it's a 20-something page report, and there's all these different levels. And for most people, the test is wrong, because Lindsay has done a lot of work, and the level of self-awareness is there, not just on her behaviors, but her actual motives behind everything. It's why her test was accurate. It's why my test was accurate. But I'd say about 75% of the people I work with, their test is inaccurate, because it's focusing mostly on behaviors, or we answer how we wish we were, or you know what I'm saying? Or, we've read certain numbers and we want to manipulate it to end up an 8 or a 3 because we think one type is better than the other. And here's the thing. They all have different superpowers. All of them. I could not be anything but an 8. There's no question about it. But it took that pressure off of me. So, you want to know how to take action with this. Well, just because you take the test, don't think your work is done. Actually, it's only just beginning, because if you choose to take one online, even the paid ones are wrong. I'm just letting you know this now, because it isn't until you look at the scores. And I usually say, look at the top 3 or 4, because usually the top one for most people that are just starting this personal development journey is actually either a wing or where they go in stress.
Oh.
So what I'm noticing is when I look at that top number, sometimes I'm like, okay, what is the type that this is the stress number? And almost always that's what it is, because our stress behaviors are the biggest pain point, right? And those are the ones we're most aware of. We know our stress points. We know the things that trigger us. And so a lot of times when we're doing that, that's what pops up as our top score, but that's actually not the case.
Yeah.
Right. So when you get your scores back, and this also takes a level of honesty. Like Lindsay could have easily convinced herself she was a 3.
That's what I wanted to be, by the
I
way.
know.
And I probably did try to manipulate the answers.
I'm sure you did.
Talk a little bit. The 3 is the achiever, right?
Right. And the good news.
Success driven.
Yes. Like get shit done.
I was like, oh, that's totally me, guys. It's fine. It's fine.
And they're a chameleon, which a 9 kind of is a chameleon in a different way. But the good news for Lindsay is the 9, when they're in a growth pattern, takes on the healthy qualities of the 3. So she gets what she wants anyway, right? So even if she manipulated the test, if I had chatted with her and really unpacked the motive behind it, I would have absolutely said, nope, you're not a 3. Actually, that's just where you go when you're healthy. So you can celebrate the 3-ness in you. But underneath that drive for success is this person that is, more Yoda-like than just like a put your head down and plow through things.
Yeah.
Because you actually feel things. You feel all the things, right? So if you're looking at your scores, don't just buy into it because you like it. And don't just like use it as a weapon or a wall. Like I said, take the top 3 or 4 numbers, and instead of looking at the behaviors and the stereotypes, which is why it's being used. I mean, and I get the fun memes. I do the fun memes too, and they are hilarious. But really look at the motive behind it. Because if you looked at me, you might think I'm a 3 or a 1 or a 6 or even a 7, depending on the environment. But at the root of who I am, everything I do is motivated by the motive of an 8. Everything. It's like, I will not be vulnerable. And that doesn't mean like speaking on stage is making you all cry. What I mean by vulnerable is I won't be backed into a corner and unable to make choices. And so my drive for success for a lot of people looks like an achiever, but I don't give a shit about recognition or achieving. The reason I drive myself for success is to be able to make choices and to not be vulnerable to circumstances or life, right?
Yeah.
Very different than being an achiever because I feel like that's where my worth is. Yeah. I know my worth's not in what I achieve. My achievement comes from a place of, I don't want to be backed into a corner without being able to make a choice.
Yep.
Totally different.
Which, when you put it that way, gosh, this is all just coming like so full circle because while I thought I was a 3, the truth is in this season of life, one of the things I've struggled with most is that I perceive my success as disrupting the peace that I actually want. So I downplay the good things that happen. I'd rather talk about, here are my challenges. So it's something I've been working on stepping into, is just being okay that sometimes that success or achievement is meant to trigger something in someone else, or because of their type, it triggers something. You said at our mastermind, about being a trigger, and everything in me went, oh, that's like the last thing I want to be. That is the absolute last thing, but it also holds me back sometimes because I want peace over, but then I also have this internal drive to achieve and to step into my purpose.
The thing about triggering, and especially if you're a thought leader or any kind of leader, even if you're the leader in your own home, and, as an 8, I used to get off on triggering people because it kept me safe, right? Yeah. If I could intimidate people, that meant they could not harm me, right? Because I have intimidated them. The difference between the unhealthy version of me and the healthy version of me, I actually enjoy triggering people because I know my intention is to help you grow, and it's not coming from this protective place, but more of the effective place, right? And I'm here to tell you, if you're being triggered, take it as an opportunity to grow, because it's never about the person that's triggering you. It's not about me triggering you. This is a beautiful, and I'm here to tell you, if you're being triggered, you are ready and capable of growing and changing. You are. And it's going to keep coming and whopping you upside the head with these same triggers left and right until you get the message. And so be thankful. I'm just going to say, be thankful if I'm triggering you right now, because know that it's coming from a loving place and a place that, I want you to grow. And, because if we, I wrapped myself in the proverbial bubble wrap my entire life. And yes, I was protected and safe and nobody could touch me. And that was great. But it robbed me of joy, of happiness, of intimacy that I didn't even know I was missing.
Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to step out on that front line of your life and take some hits, because that's where all the good stuff is, and know that you're capable. And when you understand your type, like I said, information doesn't equal transformation. You have to take that information and be really willing to look at all parts of it, not to beat yourself up. Like, this is not a weapon on yourself, and it is not your job to start using it as a weapon on other people. Like, oh, you're a 3, you're an asshole. Like, no, we
Right.
don't do
Yeah.
that. Or
Don't do that to your spouse.
nope. I mean, it's good to understand. Like my kids, like, well, I'm not gonna lie. There's sometimes like, oh, that's very 7 of you right now. And she's like, shut up. But it's all in fun and joking. But when we start to use this as a weapon on ourselves, it defeats the whole purpose of this. So
Yeah.
only really explore this if you're really, really, really ready and you really are tired of being in the same cycle over and over that isn't serving you. If you know there's a calling on your life that you're not stepping into, you have to look at all parts, not just the really great parts, not just the really crappy parts, but the
Yeah.
collective. You have to look at the collective.
Yeah.
All the
Oh, that's so true and so good. And I know that people are going to wonder how to get more information about this, how they can work deeper with you if they want to really understand and be typed correctly. But before I have you share that, let's just give people, because we've talked a lot about motives, and you don't have to do all 9, but maybe like the top ones that you see in women who are building businesses or chasing a big idea, big dream. What are some of the most common types you see and their motive? If you even just want to like quick give us like the highlight version of that.
Well, I can really quickly go through the 3. I'll tell you each superpower for each one. So within the 9 basic types, there's actually 27. It's a long story. Listen to my podcast, you'll hear what that's about.
Yeah, exactly.
There's 9 basic types, and there's 3 in each intelligence center. So we all have our head, our heart, and our gut or instincts, right? And 3 of those types fall into each one. We use all of them as human beings. We all use our head, our heart, and our instincts. But there's one that's dominant for each of us, right? So in that instinctual triad are the 8, 9, and 1. The 8 being the challenger, who's the superpower of, taking charge and knowing how to get things done, the champions for others. That's me. The 9, the peacemaker, which is what Lindsay is, who can make sense of things that don't make sense. That person. So they're an instinctual person. So she can read a situation and kind of know how to keep the peace and diffuse situations that can get heated. And then the 1, who are my perfectionists. I see a lot of these in business. It's usually the 8s, the 1s, and the 3s, and a lot of 6s too in entrepreneurship, but they all can. I've seen lots of 5s and 4s. Like, there's not one that's like, don't think if you're like a 5 that you suck at entrepreneurship. It's not
Sure.
true.
Yeah.
But there are certain ones that tend to rise to the surface. Doesn't mean they're better. So then the 1 is the last thing in the instinctual intelligence center. And these people are the ones that constantly are making things better, right? Super high level standard integrity. They want to be good, right? So then in the heart center are the 2, 3, and 4. So I have a child in this center. The helper, this is the 2. Their superpower, they're the empaths and the compassion people. They're super people oriented, and they support the best interests of the organization and make people feel valued all the time. When they're not healthy, almost to a fault, where the codependency trap can happen in there. The 3 is the other one, which is the achiever, which we've talked about. Optimistic, resilient, dream big, inspire others to follow them. Like, they create movement, right? That one I see a lot, especially like in the network marketing space, sales, anything where there's keeping score or data. The achievers love that. The individualist is the 4. That's the last one in the heart part, and their superpower is they're the creative type, the most creative type on the Enneagram. It's also the least typed number because they usually kind of keep to themselves. They're the artists, the creatives, musicians, things like that. But they make things beautiful. when they can actually step into owning that. But they can struggle with depression. So the last three in the head triad, these are our thinkers. The 5 is the investigator, right? They are the research junkies. Like if you tell them about, like, so when I've typed a 5, I'm like, don't stay up all night Googling everything about the 5. Sure enough, I get a text at 6 in the morning. I've been up all night, right? But they have a perceptive nature and objectivity that makes them great. They're great advice givers. They're like walking Google. Love them. The 6 is the loyalists. They're usually my closest friends. They keep the group, project, and community safe. And for somebody that doesn't want to be put in a vulnerable situation but is super reactive, the 6 is kind of keep me in check, right? Because they're the troubleshooters. And they come up with solutions for any problem. They're great, but they can get super anxious and almost paralyzed if they get too much in their head. And then the 7s, the enthusiasts, this is your friend Lori and my daughter. They're the best at stupid idea time, right? Like the biggest, they're optimistic, creative juice, and boundless energy, can move things very quickly. And then they can get flaky and a little distracted and scattered when they're not so great. But those are all the superpowers of all 9. And all of them are beautiful. And here's the great thing is we need every single one of you. Yeah. I don't want a team of me because that would be a shit show. Yeah, let's just be real. Right? So when we talked about this at the beginning, how I built leadership is I had every type around me. And because I knew who I was talking to, and this is why it's really important, you got to know yourself first. So a lot of times people will say, hey, can you help me with my XYZ, my team, my organization? I'm like, yeah, but you have to go first. Leaders always go first. Yeah. And you have to really have your own level of self-awareness to know what kind of, how certain people can maybe perceive you before you can start helping others in their own self-awareness. It's really, really important. But it's such a great tool because within minutes, I can tell at least 1 or 2, I can be within a type or 2 of knowing who I talk to. And when I can speak their language of what's in it for them that fast, it builds credibility, it builds trust, it pulls out their greatness. And isn't that what, as leaders, we all want to do, is to pull the greatness out of everybody and build their confidence and empower them, whether it's your children or a team you're leading. Like, it is a superpower, but you have to be willing to go first.
Yeah. I could talk to you about this all day long.
Same. I could geek out all
I know.
Day.
I'm like, we will allow people, we'll just leave them there wanting more. I would love if you would share though, because you are doing some very cool work around this, both with individuals, with organizations. So talk about some of your favorite ways to take this powerful tool and help people be their best.
I think if you think about business, even if you hate sales is what drives every business. Like everything, you got to have revenue to have a business, right? And what drives revenue? Sales. And when you have this as a power, management and leadership and sales are really the areas, and obviously families and things like that, because that's leadership. When you're leading a family, that's leadership.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about business, if you can speak the language of your customer, whether it's a certain niche or a certain person, like when you can speak their language, you build trust. And in the world we live in today, people are so tired of the copy and pasting kind of crap and the fake vulnerability online. People are really, really tired of it. And anybody of quality can sniff that out. And so when I'm working with teams or organizations or businesses, companies, when you build a culture where everybody is honored for who they are, and using this as that cultures that have such a good energy are things that will be resilient and sustain even if the economy takes a turn. Cultures are where people go to actually want to work. I mean, you think about like our friend, we just saw him speak, Organifi, for example. Drew Canoli is the owner of Organifi, and he has created a culture within his organization by honoring people for who they are, and that actually drives revenue. It drives profits. It drives productivity and passion and purpose. And so when I'm working with organizations and saying, okay, this is the collective here. This is who we have. This is how you bring the best out in this person. This is how you bring the best out in this person. This is how you bring the best out in this person. If you can speak to those things, those people will go to bat for you over and over and over again. They won't call in sick. Your turnover will go down. Your culture will be high. People will show up energized and ready to crush it, which what does that do? Drives revenue, drives profits, all the things. So like if you really want to be effective, like you need to know who you're working with, but you got to know you first. So that's my favorite thing to do is kind of like, it's like a puzzle for me and I'm obsessed with it. I'm like, ooh, who do we have here? Who do you, I mean, that's why like when I built my organization and the leadership I did, it was like fun. It was a puzzle. It's like, ooh, what do we got? What do we got? Now let's see how good I am at speaking to them, because at the end of the day, you know, most of us live in a whiffum, what's in it for me mentality. You got to switch it to whiffed. What's in it for them? What's in it for them? And when you can speak to that, you're unstoppable as an organization, as a business, as a person, as a mom, as a human being. Yeah. Because that's where deep connection happens. It's where trust is built. It's where credibility is built. And that's what is driving everything.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, where can people go to find out how to work with you, how to hire you for their organization? What's the best place for them to visit?
You can go to my website, which is traceyo'malley.com, or, you know, if you're on the gram, you can find me there too and do all silly stories. And I talk Enneagram a lot, Tracy_O'Malley. And on every Tuesday on my podcast, I drop Ennea talk, all sorts of things.
Yeah. And I've been binging on those episodes as well as your Instagram highlights about each type. So if you're really geeking out on all of this, you could go down a full internet rabbit hole just on her Instagram and her podcast.
Oh, and I'm bringing more to the table. I'm bringing more, baby.
Oh gosh, I cannot wait. I seriously cannot wait. So we wrap up every show with one question. And I do believe that one of the biggest contributions any of us can give to others who are paving their own way is our story and our what we've learned from it that others can learn from too. So, you know, we're all about getting out of our own way into action around our next big idea. So if you had just one message that you can give to the women and men, because there's some who listen to this show too, coming up and taking the next step in pursuit of their big idea, and you just had one message to encourage them, what would it be?
Oh, you guys, you know, when I think back on my close to 50 years of life and all the things that I thought unqualified me for what I'm doing today. I mean, all those things, I was like, nope, I'm disqualified. Yep, I grew up in an alcoholic home. Disqualified. Yep, I have my own alcohol problem. Disqualified. Oh, I've been divorced. Like all those things that I thought disqualified me were actually the very things that qualified me to be who I am for all of you today. So I know there's many of you listening out there that feel like I suck at life, but you're smiling through it, or your Instagram feed is like pretty perfect, but you know, it's like, yeah, that's not the real truth. I want you to know that all those things that you are hiding, bring them to the surface, because those are the very things, those things that I talk about today, those that have known me the last 8 years, I went 4 decades trying to bury them and hide them from every human being I talked to. And wouldn't you know it, those very things are what created a movement, not just in my life, but in hundreds of thousands of lives, because those very things that I thought disqualified me were the very things that qualified me. So before you start counting yourself out, take a look at those things and really bring them to the surface. You have an army of people here that will love, cheer you on, support you, because those of us that have done the air quotes work, we will see that and we will champion right behind you, cheering you on. And they are the things that will help you step into that calling and create the movement that you so desire, but you have to show up in all parts of you.
Gosh. Okay. Well, now everyone sees exactly why you've been such an impactful person in my life. I'm so grateful to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, girlfriend, it's my pleasure. It's an honor to watch you and be in the front row cheering you on. You're amazing.